An interesting conference that you are going to give here at Prețuit Noi, and for the launch of your new book, Live Not by Lies, that has been translated to Romania as Să nu trăim în minciună, manual pentru dizidenții creștini, la editura Contramundum. Many conservatives and people in the church believe that, you know, the devil may not be that black, and that things may not be so bad in terms of the birth of the coming of a new kind of totalitarianism. What can we say to those who might accuse us of exaggerating the threat or of even being, you know, apocalyptic?
Right. Well, I'm apocalyptic because I think a kind of apocalypse really is happening. I wrote this book because a few years ago, people who immigrated to America from the Soviet bloc countries began telling me that the things they were seeing happen in the U.S. now reminded them of what they left behind. It seemed alarmist to me. How is this possible that it looks like totalitarianism? But the more I started investigating it and listening to them, the more I realized they were seeing something that really was there, that their experience prepared them to see. Now, it doesn't look like totalitarianism in the sense of the gulags, secret police, things like that. No, that's not here. This is a softer form of totalitarianism. You will still lose your job. You can lose your professional career. You can lose your status. You can lose your friends, even your family, if you dissent in any way from this new left-wing ideology that we call in America wokeness. It has to do with being in favor of gender ideology, with Black Lives Matter, all of these things. It's all part of the same left-wing progressive ideology that actually functions like a false religion. Now, I dedicate Live Not by Lies to a Catholic priest named Father Tomislav Kolakovic, who died in 1990. He was a man for our own time. In 1943, he was doing anti-Nazi work in Zagreb. The Gestapo was coming for him, so he fled the country, went to Bratislava in his mother's homeland, and began teaching at a Catholic university there. He told his students, the good news is the Germans are going to lose this war. The bad news is, when it's over, the Soviets will be ruling this country, and the first thing they're going to do is persecute the church. We have to be ready for it. So what Kolakovic did was form these small groups of committed Christians, usually young students, who had come together to discuss what was happening around them and to figure out what they should do as faithful Christians to resist. He spread these groups all over Slovakia. Within 2 years, there were groups in every small town. The bishops of his own church told him, Father, you're being alarmist, things are not going to be so bad, stop scaring people. But Father Kolakovic had studied the communist mindset because he wanted to be a missionary, and he did not listen to his bishops. Sure enough, when the Iron Curtain fell over Czechoslovakia, the first thing the communists did was go after the churches. But because Father Kolakovic had prepared those who were willing to listen, they formed the backbone of the underground Catholic Church there. I think that we, all of us Christians, Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, we are living in a Kolakovic moment now when we have to take advantage of the freedom we still have to prepare ourselves for what's coming. With God's help, we might be able to avert this apocalypse, but it is so far advanced now, and our ability to resist is so weak because the faith is so weak, at least in the West. And because we have already accepted so many of the bases for this totalitarianism, that I think that we Christians are going to have to suffer a lot in order to be resilient in the face of it. But what is the choice? The only choice we have is to surrender to it. That we cannot do.
Right. In Romania, we have a particular context of the discussion about these new ideological challenges and threats that we are facing. So there is a great fear, partly induced but partly based on realities, of Putin's Russia or of Orban's Hungary. Our most important ally right now is the United States, and the history of the last 50 years in Romania. In our context, the Americans were seen as our potential saviors, expected here to come as liberators. We need to be aware of this context. So under those conditions, many put geopolitical considerations above any other type of cultural or social dangers. What could a religious conservative or a conservative do in such a situation where we seem to be caught between, as the saying goes, Chila and Charybda,
Yes.
between two things that may be equally dangerous?
Right.
What do we do when the saviors themselves seems to be gripped by the fever of a totalitarian movement, as you are pointing out?
Yeah, you know, I love my country. I'm an American. It's home for me. I have always thought that America was a force for good in the world. But now I'm seeing America being the exporter of evil, of gender ideology in particular, the way that we are, from our corporations as well as our government, exporting LGBT to destroy the family. We're exporting all of this wokeness. And we're tearing our own society up. I invite Romanians to look at America, see what we're doing to ourselves. We are destroying, using this ideology, we're destroying our education system. We are destroying medicine. Believe it or not, they actually have woke medicine where doctors are afraid to say what they really think for fear of being called racist or homophobic and losing their jobs. And we're destroying science. I mean, it's incredible. If you told people 10 years ago that this is what would happen, nobody in America would have believed it. Yet here we are. So I would strongly warn Romanians to be very, very skeptical of what you hear coming from the West. I think that it's understandable because of the experience of communism to look to the West and to America as a savior. But we are now not your saviors. In fact, we could be your downfall. Now, this is not to say that therefore Putin is great or China is great. I have big problems with them too. Sure. But it's simply to say that the situation is a lot more complex and dangerous than we thought. I would encourage Romanians to be skeptical of all these big powers. Nobody is going to come to save you. In fact, we might come to corrupt you. Do not allow to happen to yourselves what we are allowing to happen to ourselves in America. Fall back on your own traditions. Have confidence in yourselves that you have within what God has given you, in your Orthodox faith most of all, but also in your own traditions. You have something good here, something you should be proud of, not ashamed of. This new woke ideology will try to make you ashamed of everything about your history, including your faith. That's what they're doing in America, and that's how they're gaining control. And you have to reject this. They will destroy your culture. They will destroy what it means to be a Christian and destroy what it means to be Romanian if you let them. But you have the power to say no. I would say stop trying to impress Europe or to feel like you have to be accepted by Western Europe and America by being super progressive. We have a lot of money and cultural power in the West, but we are spiritually impoverished. In this country, Romania, you are spiritually quite rich. We need what you have. If things were going the way they should go, we in the West would be looking to you from your experience under communism and the depth of your Orthodox faith to save us from ourselves. That's what's happening in the world today.
Right, and I would quote Solzhenitsyn here, who said, I'm not a critic of the West, I'm a critic of the weakness of the West.
Right.
And I think that this spiritual downfall is precisely one of the things that Solzhenitsyn used to criticize in all his interviews and work.
Yeah, well, we have become so weak in the West because we have become used to comfort. And we have, over the past few decades, gotten to the point where we expect comfort to be the natural state of things. I interviewed a couple of years ago, well, it wasn't an interview really, it was a conversation with a European journalist friend who was studying at Harvard University, the greatest university in America, maybe even the world. He spent a year there doing graduate work. I asked him when I saw him in Boston, what is the most important thing you have learned from your year at this top university? He said, how fragile the American elites are. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, Rod, it's incredible. We go to these classes, these are advanced classes at Harvard. We go there and the professors will say at the beginning of class, we can't talk about this topic and that topic because some of you have come to me before class and said it's too triggering. It will make you feel unsafe if we talk about this thing. So it's off limits. My European friend said, we Europeans looked at each other and said, could this be real? Yes, it's real. It's happening everywhere. He said, though, that these elite Americans have no doubt that they are meant to rule the world, but they can't deal with reality. This is ultimately going to have a profound effect on Europe, because whatever happens in America eventually comes to Europe. Look at what's happening to us in America. Recognize that this could be your future and stand against it. You Romanians have the advantage of time and experience. Think of yourselves as like Father Kolakovic's followers and use this freedom you have before your culture becomes woke and fragile to protect yourselves.
And I would quote another example that's very recent. So the European Commission has very recently imposed an LGBT equality strategy, so-called equality strategy, on all the European Union member states. And the strategy was also voted by the Romanian Senate and will be most likely voted by the decision-making chamber, the Chamber of Deputies. There is no hope, in my opinion, for a negative vote there, because Romanian parliamentarians, even if they don't believe in this, and they don't share those values of the strategy, they are very compliant and they are very obedient to what comes from the European Commission. So this strategy includes sometimes things that are really striking and shocking. There is talk about rainbow families and rainbow children. It is stated that gender recognition must not have age restrictions. Also, it is invoked the need to set up rainbow counters in police stations across European member states. However, this strategy has gone almost unnoticed in our countries. That there has been virtually no discussion, no debate around it. And with very few, problems or let's say talk around its potential consequences. But in my assessment, this may jeopardize religious freedom and will jeopardize religious freedom and parental rights. So what do you advise Christian families and conservative families and churches in general to do in such a situation?
Wake up to see what's happening around you. We can't depend on our leaders anymore, our political leaders, to take the courageous step to defend the family, to defend religious liberty, to defend the good things in life. In America, the Republicans are the conservative party, but they've been totally cowards too, in part because they are owned by big business. But this is the way of the world. We can't just throw our hands up and say, well, we can't do anything. We have to get ready for it. And I should say, I hope this isn't the case in Romania, but in America, even Christian leaders don't dare speak against this because they're terrified of being called bigots, homophobes, transphobes. Meanwhile, it is destroying the family, and it is destroying even the lives of children. Do you know that recently in the United States, one of the most popular children's shows is something called Blue's Clues for little children before kindergarten age, recently had an episode in which they had a drag queen singing a song about a gay rights parade. They had transgenders, they had pansexuals, they even had a character who had had her breasts cut off, presenting this to little children as if this was something to be celebrated. They were telling them to celebrate that. This is satanic, this is demonic, the church knows this. Even if you're not a religious believer, if you have any common sense in humanity, you know this is evil. So what can Romanians do? They can talk about it, even though the media doesn't want to talk about it because the media is progressive and it wants this to pass into culture without any debate. Same thing happened in America. Back 15, 20 years ago when we started talking about gay marriage, you could never find any argument against gay marriage in the media because they didn't think there was one. They didn't want people to think critically about what was happening. Same thing with transgender. It's all propaganda. We in our churches, whether it's our priests, our bishops, or our lay leaders, and in our families, we have to talk about these things openly and prepare ourselves. Our children will be raised in these societies that insist that we believe these lies and live by these lies. We can't do it. We have to figure out now, while we have the freedom, what our strategies of resistance will be so our children can know the truth and that they are prepared spiritually to suffer for the truth. I would rather have my children be poor or work in a job where they don't make any money at all or little money at all than to see them abandon the faith or abandon truth just to get a middle-class job. That's what's at stake here, really. Under communism, Václav Havel, the first president of a free Czechoslovakia, he told this story about, it's a fable of a man who is a greengrocer under communism, and he puts a sign in his window like everyone under communism saying, "Workers of the world unite." Well, what happens, says Havel, if he takes that sign down saying, "I don't believe this, nobody believes this, I'm not going to live by this lie"? Well, he has his business taken away from him, his family suffers, maybe his kids can't get into the best universities, and so on. But what has he gained by his willingness to suffer? He has shown that it is possible to live in truth despite the totalitarianism. If enough people are willing to do this, then we can overturn it in time. But we have to understand what is being asked of us. We have to understand what the devil is saying in our ears to try to make us conform to this new ideology. And we have to say, no, we're not going to do it. You have in this country, Romania, the example of men like the late Father George Calciu, who would not accept this. And he stood up, he was suffered terribly for the sake of the truth, but he triumphed. And Christ triumphed through him. Christ can triumph through every one of us in the face of this new soft totalitarianism if we have the courage to suffer and to suffer together. That's not an appealing thing necessarily to tell people. Everybody wants to think, oh, you can get rich and live the life you want, but only at the cost of your soul and the soul of your children.
Sure. So another example from your book, Live Not by Lies, Să nu trăim în minciună, you show the risk of a soft digital totalitarianism that could be inspired by the experience of the Chinese social credit system that you have already mentioned in this discussion, and the capitalism of surveillance that is described by Shoshona Zuboff. So do you think that initially that the Western powers could take advantage of this pandemic crisis to expand this system, or maybe even China could take advantage of this crisis to expand this system and the control capabilities throughout the world? Because I am thinking, for example, of what we call the Green Pass that has been voted at the level of the European institutions, and how basic rights and freedoms have been weakened by simple directive or administrative orders during this pandemic.
Yeah. Well, the social credit system is something that not a lot of Americans know about. It's the system in China where everything is constantly monitored. your smartphone, your internet, where you go on the street through closed-circuit television. They apply algorithms and artificial intelligence to know everything about every single Chinese person. And they give you a rating, your social credit rating, that says whether or not you are a good citizen. If you do what the Communist Party wants, you get a high rating, you get lots of privileges. If you do what they don't want, like go to church, well, you get a low rating, and eventually you can be kicked out of the economy. And all of this is happening without the involvement of human beings. We have the same capabilities in the U.S. now that is not coming at us from the state, but it's coming at us from capitalism, from major corporations. And they're doing it completely legally. On your smartphone, when you put a new app in there, nobody reads the fine print, but it collects your data and it sends it to corporations who say they only want to use it to know how to sell you things. Yeah. Well, what happens when they decide that people who are politically unreliable, and they know what you watch on the internet, they know what you watch on TV, they know what papers you read, and so on. They know who your friends are. When they decide that you need to be punished in this soft way for your political views, what if they think that you're a domestic terrorist?
Right.
Yeah, and this is coming. Nobody in America imagines that it's happening, but we can see it coming now. We're going to have, I believe, ultimately a Western-style social credit system to control the population. And but this is something that we don't see as something totalitarian because it's not coming to us from the state. It's coming through big business. Yeah. But I interviewed a woman in Prague, Kamila Benda. She and her family were dissidents. Her late husband went to prison in Czechoslovakia for being an anti-communist dissident. She said that people don't understand that nobody collects information innocently, that sooner or later they will use this against you. Now, it's very, very hard to drop out of this system right now. For example, here in Europe, I've been living in Budapest for the past couple of months. I've paid for almost everything using my card, not using cash, because people want the cards. It's very convenient. The problem with that is somebody somewhere knows everything I've bought, every store I've gone to, and if they want to find a way to use that against me, they can. If we move to a cashless society, it will be possible for people who have not taken the mark of the beast, so to speak, to be kicked out of the economy, of being unable to buy and to sell. This is happening now.
Yeah, okay, so we should be aware of this risk. And as you have shown in your recent book and in many of your articles, the big corporations, Silicon Valley, but also the vast majority of large multinational or transnational companies have allied with radical leftist groups such as woke or social justice warriors.
Yeah.
How do we explain this alliance that seems very strange, given the fact that this revolution, because we are speaking of a revolution or of the same socialist revolution that we have seen in the 20th century, in the end this revolution would also involve a reset of capitalism, a system from which until now all those big corporations have only benefited.
Okay. Well, there's a cynical explanation and I think a deeper explanation. The cynical explanation is the big corporations saw what happened with Occupy Wall Street and it scared them that the government was in some way going to come down on them and to help reduce income inequality by changing the way the corporations do business. But they figured out that if they could embrace wokeness, if they could take the side of gay pride and Black Lives Matter and so forth, then they could neutralize the progressive opposition. So it doesn't matter what Apple Computers, the way it treats its Chinese workers, if it can demonstrate to young Americans that they're in favor of gay pride and Black Lives Matter. So I think that is actually happening. That is one of the explanations here. But I think more deeply, these companies are run by elites. they went to the same universities as the social justice warriors, the same elite universities. They adopted the same social outlook. And as the social justice warriors marched through the institutions, to use Gramsci's phrase,
The long march to the institution.
yes, yeah, they also marched through the corporate boardrooms. It is impossible to overstate how important it is to corporations to be thought of highly by their own peers. I mean, I used to be a film critic in New York, and you would see Hollywood every year. They would lose so much money making left-wing movies that most Americans didn't want to see. Why did they do that? You think that shouldn't you want to make money? Well, it was more important to them to be respected and celebrated as good progressives by their peers. I think a similar thing is happening at the corporate level. But in the U.S., this is why social conservatives have lost the culture war. When big business used its power to get behind cultural liberalism, it was over, because big business is so powerful in America, and because conservatives, we have this sort of Reagan-era idea that all oppression comes from the state, but business is great, or at least neutral. That has changed, and now this new totalitarianism we're seeing, it's primarily coming from business and from institutions outside the state. The state is rushing to catch up with that, and that's something new for Americans, and one of the reasons why we don't see it as totalitarianism, though that's exactly what it is.
Right, and I'd like to use the last 5 minutes of our discussion, of our interview, to also touch on potential surviving solutions, and the solutions that you proposed in your book and in your previous book, The Benedict Options. So how do we resist, how can we resist this crisis, and what do you mean by live not by lies in the end?
Well, in the end, we have to reject these lies that are coming to us through this new ideology, this lie about what family is, this lie about what the human person is, this lie that our history, our past is something to be ashamed of, and our religion is something to be cast aside as something that keeps us from marching to this glorious progressive future. It was a lie when the Marxists said it, and it's a lie when these woke capitalists and others say it. So, but to resist these lies, which have so much power in society and will have, I think, increasing power, we have to do as people did under communism. We have to form these small cells of people who are true believers in the faith, people who have faith in our civilization, and who can remind each other who we are. When the Nazis invaded Poland, they wanted to destroy the Polish nation by destroying its sense of itself as a nation and destroying its religion. The future Pope John Paul II, Karol Wojtyła, he and his theater colleagues, because he was involved in the theater, they would write and perform plays that would remind people who came to see them secretly what it meant to be a Pole, to be a member of that nation, and what it meant to be a Christian. We need to develop a similar strategy in the face of wokeness. People in Romania, for example, should remind themselves what it means to be a Romanian, what it means to be a person of the West, the bearer of this incredible culture and civilization, of which we must never be ashamed. And more importantly, they need to remind themselves what it means to be a Christian, an Orthodox Christian. And that's not something we can just do from reading books. We have to do it together. We have to come together and talk about these things and live our faith out without shame. And we have to be willing, I'm afraid, to suffer for the faith. If we are not willing to suffer for it, it's over. I spoke to an Orthodox, a Russian Baptist Christian in Moscow who told me, go back to America and tell the believers that if you are not willing to suffer for your faith is just hypocrisy and you will be destroyed. That's true for Orthodox, Catholic, and Protestant. It's true for everybody. So we need to not go forward with fear. One Orthodox dissident I talked to in Russia, Viktor Popkov, this is in the book, he said that we can't simply run away from bad things. We have to run towards something good. Our faith is something beautiful and true. God has given us such a gift there. So let's orient ourselves around what is true, good, and beautiful. Not just reject what is bad, but to embrace what is good. We have to have something good to believe in, or we can go to a very dark place.